Disclaimer, I played Atomic Heart on the Xbox Series X and will talk about it in the context of me doing so. Any performance or glitch issues may differ to others. I will try to indicate when I talk spoilers. Be aware, footage may be considered spoiler heavy. Atomic Heart is a first-person shooter and is the debut game of developer Monolith. The game claims to be inspired by games such as Bioshock, set in 1955 and an alternate history. One aspect of my review I won't be touching on too much: open world testing grounds content. Apologies and warning here. Past a certain point in it doesn't tell you beforehand. Testing grounds become unavailable, so I'd have to go all the way back to that point in the game. And to be honest, I don't feel like that's really worth it. So apologies again, but it is what it is. I played on normal difficulty or local failure, and my gameplay will reflect as such. Speaking generally, the game ran on the Series X with no major issues with frame drops or stuttering, but the game really lacks in this department is bugs. I had a lot of bugs in Atomic Heart, particularly to do with the enemy's AI. Some bosses just stay still bugged, and then since the enemy placement and density is a bit too frantic, it causes me to just go through walls or be like hard locked in the corner. That's not really a bug issue, but it's constantly hinders the experience alone, and that you could just call that a gameplay issue, to be honest. Now, I do have to compliment the art direction and the aesthetic of the game a lot, especially those in the underground areas. A lot of the motifs and the themes that do seemingly change from area to area. There could be like 3 or 4 different styles or different wings or districts to just one level. Graphically, the game looks okay, but there is something I can't put my finger on that doesn't make me really want to say it looks great in the graphical aspect. I don't know what in particular it is, but to me there's this dull feeling to the graphics that just doesn't make me like the look of the game as much. Speaking more on terms of the overworld looks, as I said, I didn't go around most of the overworld content, but I can comfortably say it felt samey, and the zones like really didn't capture me. There was really no diversity in the different overworld places like the underground places had, and it just made me want to go to the next mission or next level, underground or physical level, as quickly as possible, if I'm being honest. Aesthetic wise, again, I really have to commend the art team, as they really produced great world aesthetic wise. Now, speaking more generally about the gameplay, as I said before, Atomic Heart is a shooter and it does have some RPG elements in terms of skill trees. There's different abilities like a shield, ice blast, electricity blast, polymer blast, or makes enemies more vulnerable to others. There's a neuropolymer currency that you can acquire and upgrade these abilities to make them better, like chain lightning, making the polymer blast make enemies more vulnerable to certain status effects. Now, to be completely honest, I only focused on 2 of the skill trees in my playthrough: the shock skill tree and the general skill tree that just enhances your stats as increasing the player's health, inventory, and only really later did I start to play around with the different skills and have a chance to play around with just the unupgraded state of all of the skills. I will say I enjoyed a lot of them. Despite this, I was only partial to the polymer blast and mass telekinesis skills, but I could have easily went to the other skills as well. At different levels, there are tons of chances to save your game, which feels nice, but at a certain point where every room has a door that has a safe room, that I don't really get why you even forced the player to save like that at all. When it came to puzzles in the game, there was a variety of unique styles of puzzles. There was lockpicking in terms of physical locks, very Skyrim or Fallout 4-ish. There was lockpicking in terms of the mini game that had 3 different variations that were interesting. There's electricity lockpicking as well, puzzles as well, and there were also level specific puzzles which I enjoyed. I found the mechanics interesting most of the time, like the use of the magnets in certain levels. There was too much in terms of reused puzzles. Most were quite easy and just felt like filler to pad out the mission, I personally felt. Moving on to gunplay and combat, one aspect I can say that I really liked was the dismemberment and the gore and damage the enemies took. It was visible in a lot of enemies, especially in melee combat. Now, personally, I didn't focus on melee combat. Before I played around with at quite explicit times where they force you to use melee combat, which did stump me as I didn't focus on it. Gunplay in terms of shooting was decent. You can feel each gun had its purpose in the game. From the small handguns that made you have a lot of bullet and you're able to pick enemies off at range, to the shotgun, which just 2-hit low level robots, to energy powered railguns. Take quite a lot of energy, but they do a huge amount of damage in comparison to others. There was 2 gun types by way of ammo. There was the ballistic normal weapons that have physical ammo, which in my experience wasn't hard to come by, but it was annoying to ration with the enemy density. Then there's energy weapons, which use your energy bar in the bottom corner, replenishes over time, or with specific capsule consumables called dynamos. This did help me in terms of when I ran out of ballistic ammo, which I did a lot, and I didn't have a melee weapon focus because your inventory is limited, and I enjoyed shooting the guns the most. So having the guns that auto replenish ammo, even if it was slow, did end up saving me in some points. The shooting is a bit slower in my opinion, which made it feel more methodical and more impactful, if you want to say that, but it didn't fit with the enemy layout. Energy weapons in the game do have a secondary fire mode, like the pistol has a shockwave, the Dominator has like a BFG, like explodes in a big ball of electricity. When it came to weapon customization, there was quite a bit you could do, like upgrade the barrel, the muzzle, and the guns will actually reflect your changes physically in appearance, which was a nice touch in my opinion. There were cartridges that you could add on to your gun to allow different effects, I believe, but I didn't really use them at all, so I can't speak to their effectiveness. This is a divisive section. While the enemy designs and the movesets were unique and varied, they were let down by the placement and the sheer number of enemies placed in the open world. Especially, the worst thing about the open world sections was there was the infinitely respawning repair robot that came out and fixed the dead robots over and over, a huge waste of ammunition if you didn't know this at first. So unfortunately, instead of actually fighting the enemies in the game, the game actually incentivizes you to completely run past the enemies and avoid them to conserve your resources. This didn't help a lot with the bigger enemies, which are just bullet sponges and did not go down easily. This is a point that is far worse for the boss fights as well, but we'll get to that soon. Don't think that this is an issue just in the open world though. This could be described even worse in the levels, because you have to go and fight enemies, because there you have to fight enemies because of your limited options to go. You end up wasting a ton of ammo, and this goes back to the issue I said earlier with the bug section. The enemies just crowd around you because of how many there are, and 95% of my deaths in the game were caused by this. Also, not me having any ammo, which is the issue of this as well. Back to the positives though about the enemies. The reason why I have to stress on the enemy density and placement is because I actually liked the normal enemies quite a lot, and so it's more of a disappointment that this happens. The robot enemies are pretty good, each one fit a certain purpose in the enemy roster. The basic attack robot, larger melee focused robots, the smaller ones that attack you from afar. There was also a parasite fungus type of enemy, cool designs and were very swarmy, quick to multiply. The gameplay was also quite different, so you need to find the spawn and shred them to then not waste your time. There was also the brute fungus like enemies, which were very annoying. It comes down to the boss fights. I actually found them quite weak in terms of the mechanics and the overall gameplay. A lot of them were shoot or slash until dead. Not only that, they were just bullet spongy, which was also a shame because the actual designs of the boss fight were as good or better than the enemies' designs. There's also this thing where all the bosses are reused as normal enemies, which I'm actually in favor with, like how it was used in Dark Souls 1 in that moment where you go down to Lost Izalith and there's all those Taurus demons. In Atomic Heart, this works alright for some enemies, like the laser face normal robot and the black suit and the big infected soldiers. However, there's this one boss that I didn't really like being reused, which was the strongest of the fungus-like enemies, which came out of the test tube. With these, unless I was forced to fight them, I would avoid at all costs. Like, I'd literally just run past due to it not being fun or a waste of time, due to the bullet sponginess and the resistance to their attacks. The Dewdrop boss fight was my least favorite of the unique boss fight, and the twins were actually my favorite bosses in the game. A very good aspect of the game was the music, composed by Mick Gordon, which I really liked most of the music in the background, apart from a few weird choices. It had that retro but futuristic style, and I guess you could had this like Russian Soviet type of flair to it in the background as well. The sound was alright, nothing special in terms of building tension or using. The guns sounded okay, the robots and monsters sounded good, but I know this isn't a horror game, but it would have been good to use some sound effects and try and build some more suspense or tension. Now you're probably wondering why I separated voice acting from music and sound, and that's because some of you may already know I think the voice acting in the game is pretty bad. It gives me a lot of 1980s, 1990s dubbed anime. The delivery is either weird or messed up. I don't think it's actually actors or voice actresses themselves which were particularly bad. I think it's more to do with the direction that they were given. There would literally be the tone of a character would sporadically just change from line to line, like they were recorded out of order with minimal direction, and you could actually tell as a player that it was done like this. This is an issue in my opinion. Another smaller issue was with the subtitles and the voice acting, which didn't match a lot. This happened very frequently where the lines that were being said would be slightly different to the lines in the actual English subtitles. This isn't a huge issue, but it looks pretty bad. So you might be thinking this game seems pretty good, nothing special, but nothing in this game is abhorrently bad, right? Wrong. Here is where the game falls exceptionally short. The story and particularly the writing is the worst aspect of the game, absolutely. We've seen similar settings in games, as I mentioned before, as BioShock, but there's this thing with the writing here where it seems immature more than anything, but especially for the context of the game. You may ask what I mean by that. There's a multitude of things that make the game seem immature, where stuff is like overly weirdly sexual for no reason, particularly from the upgrade vendor bot. It was not really subtle or funny at all. It just felt extremely flat, and to be honest, it got cringy at certain points. The thing is, I'm not against this kind of humor if it's done right, but it's just done really poorly here. The other thing is the swearing being just used as filler dialogue in general. Again, if this was done right, I didn't mind, but the swearing just like every 2 or 3 lines. Swearing was just like overtly noticeable to the point where I think it was supposed to come off as funny, but it just led to the main protagonist seeming overly aggressive, rude, unlikable. It just makes the story seem more unserious, which it did have the potential to be. It would have been better in my opinion if a lot of the swearing wasn't taken out, but it was used more sparingly to give it more weight, because when you just swear every line or every 2 lines, there isn't any weight to it. It just feels like it's just filler, and it's like it just kind of ruins the lines. If the story was just immature in this way, however, it wouldn't be irredeemable or abhorrent. It would just be disappointing or distracting, but it does not help that the story being told here isn't particularly good at all. It's not only glaringly predictable and dull for the setting, it's also flippant and drawn out. This is because the main character just seems like a moron who just can't see what's in front of him. I've never been more disconnected from a story due to this level of stupidity from a main character. I got the plot twist they were gonna do later on, early on in the game, and it takes him literally the whole game to get out of his mindset. Not only did I predict the very last plot twist in the game, but there was a point on the proper ending. There's 2, but one is literally just you don't do the last mission. It ends on a cliffhanger, or it feels kind of unfinished in a way. There is DLC, which I won't talk about in this video. It seems to be fleshing out the other ending and other possibilities, which is kind of okay in my opinion, but I haven't played the DLC, so I can't speak on that. If you would want to do a separate review on the DLCs when they release, I'll do that if there is demand for it. Overall, I'd say Atomic Heart is ultimately only worth a try in my opinion in Game Pass if you have it. I wouldn't go out of my way to buy the game even on sale really. I'd say if you get it through Game Pass, play it for a bit, see if it's for you. Spent about 20 hours playing the game, so it did provide me some good enough gameplay to actually finish the game. As I said before, though, I didn't do the side stuff because the game locks you from doing it. To end this video off, there's the pros and cons. Pros: great music, good puzzles, great enemy variety, exceptional art and aesthetic being presented, decent combat with great dismemberment. Cons: bad voice acting, terrible story and writing, bullet sponge enemies, and particularly the bosses. Sound design could have been better. Thank you for watching this video. Another review out. I'm trying to get these more and more of these happening. I have 3 reviews in the background that I've already written the scripts for, and I'll just say 2 of them are pretty big reviews in comparison, and one of them is a smaller review. But see you in the videos. Thank you if you watched the video to the end.